With the release of Skirk in 5.7, the topic of who are the best DPSs in Genshin Impact is being hotly debated once again. So in this video, we're going to go over the top 5, who has fallen off and who has climbed the ranks. So grab some popcorn for the comments. Let's get started. Welcome to Genshin Impact, where we build and test every single character to help you decide who you want to wish for and build. These are going to be the priorities for judgment. Number 1, total team power. How strong is their strongest team? Second, contribution. You can't all just use Moika, Bennett, Citlali as your strongest team. You actually have to contribute to it. 3, flexibility. The unit can work with a decent number of other units, as well as deal with different checks, such as AoE, shield breaking, single target, etc. And we're mostly considering the hardest endgame in the game, Stygian Onslaught and Spiral Abyss, so that will definitely factor into how we're ranking the characters. And finally, comfort and ease of use. That is, most players can actually play the character without banging their head against the wall too much. You might wonder why Imaginarium Theater is not up there, and that's because Imaginarium Theater more cares about your planning and your investment into a lot of characters. How strong a DPS is at Imaginarium Theater isn't really relevant. It's more just about having enough characters to challenge the most. First off, there's a lot of DPSs that I would consider good or good enough. Characters like Navia, Chaska, even Risley with Escoffier, Ayaka, Florand, Kinich, and some others are really very strong if you put the time in. And if you want to see where all of them rank and where I put them, make sure to subscribe for my full tier list. And just because some of these characters don't make the list, it doesn't mean they're bad. But there are 2 that I wanted to talk about as honorable mentions. Gaming and Mualani have some really powerful nuke style attacks that, under the right conditions and piloted by the right players, they can compete with some of the fastest clear times of most of the DPSs on this list, and can easily out DPS at least a couple characters on this list if played properly. However, for me, and looking at the Spiral Abyss usage rates, for Mualani especially, Gaming is a 4-star, so it's harder to judge his usage rates. But for Mualani, yes, she has very strong peak times, but at only 15% usage rate on most abysses, most people just aren't able to get Mualani to go as well as the speedrun clears on YouTube would show you. But if you're a dedicated Mualani main and at the same time a dedicated Gaming main, you can absolutely get amazing clears with these characters that are competitive with the top 5 DPS in the game. But for both of them, especially Gaming, even more than Mualani, they're just very difficult. You have to get the elemental checks to align. If it's AoE, you have to get the AoE to align. You know, Gaming uses Citlali and Bennett, part of Moika's best team, and doesn't really have great teams options outside of that. And Mualani is relatively flexible, only needing Shilonin. But both of them I feel just need too much player skill, RNG to go right, the right lineup of Abyss enemies to really hit the top 5. But with that out of the way, let's get into number 5. Arlecchino. On release, Arlecchino was argued by some to be the strongest DPS in the game. But with the release of Moika, she had huge accusations of being power crapped, which in the strictest sense of the word is obviously true. Arlecchino is a pyro DPS, that's best team is Melt, other good teams are Overload and Vaporize, and Moika, of course, does them better. However, just because she does them better doesn't mean that Arlecchino does them badly. And Arlecchino is getting a couple buffs in the next upcoming endgame that might make her actually better than number 4. If things pan out the way I think that they will, Arlecchino will be able to take advantage of some of her biggest strengths to be stronger than she was before by stacking her Bond of Life for multiple rotations, leading to higher damage output overall than you're used to getting in the Spiral Abyss. And her versatility of different teams will be shown off in the Stygian Onslaught as well, because it requires 3 teams instead of 2. So having 2 pyro DPSs is all of a sudden not a big deal, because you can run Moika Melt on one side and Arlecchino Overload, Arlecchino Vape, Arlecchino Burning with Emily, Arlecchino Mono Pyro, or just a other range of things that Arlecchino is good at. And since she is mostly single target and the new mode will be single target, she is poised to be a very strong pick going into the new endgame. Her weaknesses include needing to use her burst to heal, which will lower her damage output as it resets her bond of life. She can be rather squishy. Her melt teams can require some skill to play to make sure you melt enough hits, but overall I do think she is very well deserving of this spot. In fact, there is a reasonable argument to put her above number 4. In fact, I'm going to officially call it, and I'm going to say that Arlecchino is at least tied for the 4th spot with the next on this list. And that is going to be Neuvillette. Neuvillette was the best DPS in the game on release, and so it is pretty wild to see him fall to a tie for number 4. But there is one major reason why, aside from other DPSs coming out that are stronger and stronger, Neuvillette's best feature is his AoE. In the new mode, it is strictly a single target mode. So I am very dubious of Neuvillette's ability to keep up huge amounts of power and value in the new endgame mode, which is basically strictly single target. He is still the king of AoE. He's the best AoE DPS in the game, and he still has a ton of flexibility. He has a new best in slot teammate with Escoffier, and the newest version of Innefa's pre-release information, the character from Nod Cry who can enable Lunar Charge, could potentially give Neuvillette another best in slot team with a Lunar Charge, Electrocharge type team. All of this contributes to him. All of this added to the fact that most players find him very, very easy to play, and he is the go-to pick for an easy, simple Abyss clear. I do think his flexibility is a little bit overrated, because if you don't use Farina, a lot of teams can fall off. However, if you are skilled with Neuvillette, or maybe you have his C1, and you really build a lot of energy onto your Xiangling, Neuvillette Vape is a thing you can do. It's not something that's worked for me because I only have Constellation 0 Neuvillette. I do test my DPSs with their weapons, so if you were to say go for a battle pass weapon and get Neuvillette C1, you could maybe argue that as a more viable playstyle for him. But even without Neuvillette Vape, you still have Escoffier, you still have his traditional hyper carry, and then now you're going to have Innefa as well. And again, he's just a very comfy choice for a lot of players and the best AoE DPS in the game. I do feel like he deserves his spot at a tie with Arlecchino for number 4. And now moving on to the top 3. So numbers 4 and 5 are a bit more debatable, a bit more contentious, but if you're asking me, all the testing I've done and all the calcs that I've seen, the top 3 are very clear. The new Genshin Big 3 starts with Veressa. Veressa came in and power crept my favorite character at the time, Clorand, so I know how you feel. Veressa is honestly an incredible character. She has so much going for her. Aside from her damage numbers just being the 3rd highest in the game, if you look at DPS calcs with Keqing main standards, she reaches around 110k with Moika on her team, and around 103k without. Extremely, extremely impressive stuff. But it's not just the calcs. In practice, Veressa has even more going for her than the calcs would suggest. Not only, due to her best team being on Overloaded, does she excel in multi-wave, she's also very easy to play and get very close to her maximal damage numbers out. She has great early investment with her weapon, but she also came with her best in slot teammates on her banner, that being Chevreuse and Eonson. And neither of these characters even require their C6 to actually be a great team. Of course, Chevreuse does really want the C6. It is very, very impactful, but it's far from required to have Veressa be a great DPS. Even C0 Chevreuse and C0 Eonson is enough to get Veressa going. So although she might lack technically in flexibility of a lot of teams, for example, she's not very good at Aggravate, her only other real team is something like Farina Shanyun something. But because she comes with her best in slot teammates on her banner, or at least she has so far, she has amazing quality of life. She can even swap out freely. So you can use a character like Bennett on her team instead of Moika, and just swap in and do a skill every so often. On top of that, she has very good AoE, and like I said, some of the highest single target damage. Both in the sheets and in practice, Veressa comes out as a very solid number 3 DPS. And now the top 2. Number 2 is Skirk. The most brand new character in Genshin Impact has made her way all the way to the 2nd spot in our top 5 DPS list. Yes, she does require Escoffier to reach these heights. Without Escoffier, she doesn't make the top 5 list. So if you want to consider that a downside, you know, and kick her lower down the list because of that, fair enough. But I think it's not unreasonable to get one 5-star support to support your main DPS. I just don't think that's an unreasonable ask. Of course, her other best in slot teammate is Furina, but honestly, after all the testing, a Constellation 0 Furina can be replaced by a Mualani holding Drilling Tails and Obsidian, by Yelan, or by Mona, and she still approximates the same power, similarly to taking away a main piece of a different character's very strong teammate. Argument gets a little bit harder if you have something like Furina C1 or Furina C2. Those are really crazy and very much irreplaceable, but I digress. Skirk's numbers are frankly extremely high. She basically, in pre-release, her numbers calced at a very good amount, but in practice, she attacks so quickly that her best combos do even more than she did before. On top of that, she has great flexibility, being able to use both her burst style of play or her normal attack, or using a hybrid of both. Of course, yes, this current Abyss does really favor her and gives her a massive boost, but from how I tested outside of the Abyss as well, versus the high resistance lava monster, versus some of the local legends, and versus the weekly bosses, she just consistently got the 2nd highest clear times for my testing. And although she is, again, restricted to Hydro and Cryo teams, the amount of Hydro and Cryo characters she works with and works well with is actually pretty high. On top of that, in certain types of content, multi-wave content where there's minions and then there's a boss after, Skirk's more evenly distributed damage can sometimes lead to getting clears even higher than someone like Moika, which is just insane. And although she does use contested and valuable supports such as Escoffier and Furina, her 4th slot is very flexible, Mualani, Yelan, and Mona being all very competitive. None of these spots are going to steal from other DPSs. It's not using Overload, it's not using Bennett, not using Sitlali, not using Shalonen, whereas a lot of the other top DPSs will want to use those characters. And of course, she also doesn't use Moika, one of the few characters that Moika is not her best teammate. Even Veressa at number 3 would ideally want to use Moika on her team, which is obviously going to be a problem. And so although Veressa can easily make do without and still do very well, Skirk's best in slot team does not use any of those contested supports, which is very valuable. In addition, she does have some Moika-like meta warping properties. So since Skirk came, what do I mean by that? Well, since Moika came out, the meme is that every character's best in slot team is Moika, Bennett, Sitlali. Well, with Skirk, Neuvillette best in slot team now includes Skirk, as is the case for most Hydro DPSs, even including Mualani. I know that's very hard and weird for Mualani mains to hear, but Mualani support with Skirk is both higher in theory and in practice than using Mualani Vape. So that's really weird, and you know a character is strong when this kind of stuff happens, when previously high-tier DPSs such as Mualani and Neuvillette, their new best team includes Skirk, that is similar, although not quite as extreme as the Moika meta warping power that we had with her. And finally, number 1. I've already spoiled it. I've already talked about her plenty. It is, of course, Moika. Moika is the best DPS in the game of Genshin Impact. She is the best character in the game, in my opinion. Check out my tier list if you want to see me defend that take. But she has turned the meta on its head ever since she came out. Obviously, as I've said, Moika, Bennett, Citlali is almost every DPS's best team. If not, Moika is almost on every character's best team anyways. I don't know if it's Arlecchino, I'm not going to try and claim that, but she is part of Navia's best team, she's part of Ito's best team, absolutely part of Chaska's best team. Wanderer's best team is using Viridess and Venerer to support Moika, Bennett, Citlali. That's not a joke, that's just true. Not the case for Skirk. Skirk's best team is still Skirk, but Moika is Wriothesley's best team. Wriothesley is an on-field cryo driver. Melt Ayaka, even with Escoffier, using Ayaka as a melt enabler for Moika is still Ayaka's best team by a good margin. She's part of Veresa's and Cloran's best team. She's part of Raiden's and Kenich's best team. It's just, she's part of Novelette's best team still. Not many people talk about Shalon and Citlali Moika, but that is still Novelette's best team. So overall, she has warped the meta on its head. Her top team, you know, nuking for 1,000,000+ damage, even with a free-to-play weapon and is absolutely nuts. People did complain in the beginning that she was locked to Natlan characters, but the reality is, as long as you have one, either Shalonen or Citlali, Moika performs at this top level. For a long time, until the release of Skirk, she had the top 3 teams in the game, Moika Melt, Moika Vape, and Moika Overload being those top 3. She is fairly easy to play. To really reach the high levels, there are some combos that you can do to max out the best DPS possible, but as long as you're melting her burst, you're basically doing the majority of that damage, which is very easy to do. It does require some setups, and it does require some management of the enemy's elemental aura, which can be annoying and could potentially be a hindrance in the future. That's another pro for someone like Skirk. You don't have to think about what the enemy has on them at all. You're just going unga bunga. It doesn't matter. But despite that very tiny downside, she still has huge upside. She has infinite interruption resistance, which makes her very easy to play. She has massive AoE, the best AoE in the game. When I said that Novelette was the best AoE DPS in the game, I was kind of wrong. It's Moika. Moika is still the best AoE DPS. Her bike circle is frankly ridiculous. I do personally consider both Moika and Moika and Skirk in tier 0. So I think that those are the 2 tier 0 DPSs, but Moika is definitely a massive cut above, not just for her damage being overall higher, but also the amount of teams that she has become best in slot in. And yeah, Moika is just absolutely insane in every way. Overall, if you are a meta player, just remember not to chase meta for DPSs. I highly recommend going for DPSs that you enjoy. But if we're talking for meta, you know, who are the top DPSs? I think Genshin has set it up so it's a very clear big 3. And it makes sense with the new endgame mode requiring 3 teams. And with the enemies that they've put in there, Moika is going to be your best choice for one, Skirk's going to be your best choice for another, and then I think technically Kenich might be the very best for the third, but Veressa will be a very close second behind, and Veressa overall is a better DPS than Kenich because Kenich has lots of elemental application for breaking, you know, the Lava Dragon's shield, for example, with burning. So with Stygian Onslaught, they're really pushing, especially Skirk and Moika. But I think that these DPSs, because of the way that they're made, they just have so much raw power. So it's not just about the abysses being carried towards them. They really do have the raw power to stand the test of time. One thing also to consider for Skirk is that she does have a 4th slot that's essentially empty. What if there's a character that enables Lunar Freeze? That could make Skirk the best DPS in the game, possibly. It's possible we get Lunar Melt, but I feel like Melt is so overpowered that it feels unlikely. And I'd like to finish by echoing the original statement that I said. There's a lot of good DPSs in the game, and just because, you know, Chaska doesn't hit the top 5 doesn't mean she will have a hard time clearing the hardest new endgame that's going to come out. She is going to do great in the new endgame. So is Navia, so is Kenich, so is Clorand, you know, so is Wriothesley as long as you have a Escoffier. I just think it's fun to talk about who is the strongest and if the new character comes close to that. And since I build and test every character and I keep up to date on the calcs with the characters, it's fun to do that. So let me know who your top 5 DPS is. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already. And if you don't want to do that, that is totally fine. Just watching the video has been more than enough. Thanks so much. Bye for now.